Hello, everybody. My name's Mike Mengden. I am by trade a full-time property manager and have been for 30 plus years. I do just single family residential management, don't do any commercial or apartments or anything like that. And full disclosure, I do not work on the tenant side. I work on the landlord side. So I do, we manage the properties and procure the tenants that are going to be in the lease that we're going to manage for our clients. So what I want to give to you guys today is just some helpful hints on what the property manager or the landlord may be looking for when they're renting out a property, and what you guys need to be aware of that you need to be doing with your clients or your prospects when you're showing a residential property. There is, somebody just says is there a handout? No, there is no handout for this. Most of the webinars don't have a handout. It's just a recording. So make some notes if you need to, if you want to make a few notes. So what I want to do is give you a little bit of a hint. A lot of people don't know it. What some of the background I did for this is I'm very active both locally in Houston and at the state level and at the national level on the property management side. And we do a lot of things in Texas differently than we do almost anywhere else. Texas has rental MLS in most of the larger cities around the state. Most of the rest of the country does not. They don't have any kind of rental MLS. Everything is rented by either the landlord or the landlord's agent or a property management company that's in the mix. But they are not. There's no tenant representation. There's nobody showing the tenants that work on the tenant side. Everybody works on the landlord side. So in Texas, we're a little bit different. We actually use agents in a lot of cases to show our properties. So you're going to see, we have a very vibrant MLS. All the major cities in Houston have a MLS system that has all the rentals in it, and most of the people use it. There are a few exceptions around the state, but for the most part, we're very MLS friendly on the rental side. So that's something that a lot of people don't have that type of stuff. So what I want to do is let's go through a little bit of what was on the sheet, and then we're going to go through, talk about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions for the last 15 minutes, and we will end at 1:30 so that you guys can go on and get about your day. So I talked to a lot of friends of mine that I know that do tenant rep, that actually go through tenants to do some of the background for this. And I asked him, I said, what are your issues with these different, with the different things? And so the first thing on our list for what we put on the syllabus was safety and showings. And that's not going to be any different than if you're showing a house for lease or if you're showing a house for sale. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on that other than just be careful. There's weird people out there. And so just the normal things that you would normally do. Don't park your car in the driveway, park on the street so you can get out of it. Let your prospect in the house first. You go behind them so that you can get out if you need to. Make sure somebody knows where you are. I know the agents that I talked to, every one of them said they take a picture of the people's ID when they get there and they send it to their office, and the prospect knows they did that. And so they make sure that they know that's going to be the best thing they can do. HAR has a wonderful class on safety, but it's a whole big old class, and I don't want to take up your whole time today going through that. Next thing on the list is self-showing properties. We don't have a ton of experience with that in Texas. That's fairly new to the state, and it's fairly new to Houston. It is fairly common outside of Texas. And this is a case where the landlord will put a lockbox on the property, and then the tenant can go in and either enter a code or receive that they receive from the listing agent or from the property manager, and they can get a code that opens up a box. It's a different kind of box than the super box that we have here, or combo box, whatever is on this property. It's a little different. And you can go in and have it on, you put in a code and the tenant gets in the house. And it can be, you can swipe a credit card, some of them work off of a driver's license, some of them work with talking to the agent at the office, whatever it is. It's not as common here. Most of the properties here are still regular super or combo lock boxes and are shown by agents. And that's the typical way that Houston still does it in most cases. Some agents don't like the self-showing box. Obviously, for one reason, it's competition. They don't have to pay you if they can show it themselves and not have to pay a cooperating fee. They typically, the companies that use that are more national companies. And because we use agents here, our commission splits are typically higher than what you would see in other areas. They will charge a smaller flat fee, or they will charge just a lower percentage than what you typically see in a listing in MLS here. One of the other problems that sometimes runs into these issues is that once you let the person into the house, how do you get them out? There have been issues with squatters. There have been issues with scams. Some of the Craigslist scams have started to pop up with this. We had one in Houston the other day. One of the agents I talked to said she ran into one where somebody had scammed into the property and gotten figured out how to get in, and then started advertising the property on Craigslist at a lower amount. And so the person said, I'm not going to have you show me this house for $1,500 when I can see one down the street for $900. Well, there's a reason it was for $900. And if you ever get involved with when you're running comps for somebody and the tenant says, yeah, I found one down the street a whole lot less than the one you wanted, or some place else in that subdivision, tell them to beware, because chances are that's a scam. It's a very vibrant business. There are a lot of people doing it. And the minute you send that money or wire that money or hand that money to somebody, you never see anybody again, and you're never going to get it back. And that's just the reality of it. So be very, very careful of those types of things. It's a problem. So be aware of that. Next thing is screening. Please pre-screen before you go show somebody something. It will save you a ton of time, and it will have a much better experience for you than if you don't. We have a lot of people, prospective tenants are different than prospective buyers. Prospective buyers are typically a little more savvy. It's a little more about the process, not smart. Are a little more savvy about the process and are more into it than the typical tenant client. The buyers you're going to want to get them pre-approved. They're going to want to make sure they've got their credit in place, and all of these things are part of the initial process of buying a house. It is not part of the typical process of renting a house. The tenant just says, I want to move, or I'm coming into Houston, find me a house. And in a day, they've got a house, and they picked one. And they may or may not have even seen it. They may not have had any of their stuff together. And so you're going to be wasting your time if you know that person isn't going to get accepted for the property. So don't do that. And if they don't want to answer your questions, that's a clue that you may be dealing with somebody that is not going to end up being accepted by the potential landlord. In your MLS or on the property manager's website, someplace, by Texas law, there is supposed to be a tenant selection criteria in place. And that is basically a document that will tell you what the landlord is looking for. So examples, or how much money do they need to make? Typical things that you see is 3 times the rent, 4 times the rent, something on that nature. it needs to be verifiable. Somebody that works out of their home, which a lot of people are doing right now, and then are going to have to prove that they make this kind of money. If they have an employer that you can talk to, then that's easy. If they have pay stubs, if they work by themselves, or if they have other kind of income, you need to start putting that stuff together, because most landlords are going to request it. If they have disability, we want to know how long that continues. When COVID first started in and people were getting unemployment checks and the extra fees back in the spring, we were getting people that would apply and their income was unemployment, which is not guaranteed. There's no time frame for it. And so it was very difficult. And some of them were using the higher rate that we got for a couple of months. And that's not going to apply because you don't have any way of proving that that's going to continue past the next couple of months. So that made it very difficult. Some people got in on those, some got in with extra deposit. Things like that can work for you. Things like retirement, those are great. Disability, you're going to need some kind of a record. Is it a permanent disability? Are you going to get that check for life? Or is that something that's going to run out in 2 or 3 months? So you need to be able to prove that. When you are dealing with child support, some landlords will count child support 100%. Some of them will only count it partially because, again, it's also not a guaranteed source of income. We'll talk about HUD a little bit later. That's a whole different animal altogether. Get a copy of that driver's license. Get something that you can get from them. Some people, I know some offices that represent tenants, that they go ahead and they run the tenant's credit before they even start showing the property. And that's fine. It's whatever your office wants to do. Where agents get in trouble is they then take that credit and they send it to the landlord. That is now illegal. It has been illegal since 2008, but there's a whole lot of people that still do it. So please don't run somebody's credit and send it to the landlord. If the tenant wants to send it to the landlord themselves, they can do with it whatever they want to. It's their credit. But you as the agent do not have the right or reserve the right to have an agent, a tenant send credit to you. We see in listings every once in a while, MLS looks for them, but they're still in there, that the listing agent will say, send copy of credit report with your application. Don't do that. And if there's any listing agents on this call, please don't do that. Again, if you're telling the other agent to do that, and the other agent can't. The tenant can themselves. If you want to give them the landlord's information, that's fine. And then the tenant can send it to the landlord themselves. The biggest problem on this side is that the agent, the tenant rep runs the credit, then they send it to the listing agent, and then the listing agent sends it to the landlord. You've now committed 2 federal crimes. Let me repeat that. You have now committed 2 federal crimes. It is illegal to do that. Stop it, please. And I've been teaching leasing classes for 12 years, and I still have people argue with me in class. And I'm going, just don't do this. This is now illegal. So if the landlord wants to see the credit up front, have the tenant send them to it directly. You get out of the middle of it. There is nothing in any of your agreements, either your buyer rep agreement or your exclusive right to lease agreement, that says you have the ability to take somebody's credit and send it to a third party. So just quit doing it. We have great resources in Texas for that, called My Smart Move is one of them. That's a Texas Realtor member benefit. And there's others out there too that can do all of the screening and everything, and all the agents stay out of it. So I'll get off my soapbox now. But that is one of the things that you really want to do that. When you go outside of, one of the questions here is some of their clients have their own avenue to find tenants, wonder where they can find tenants, not on MLS, Zillow, or others. We see that in other places. I have a property manager that works for me that originally came from California. And she said, I said, how did you do comps? Because we've got a beautiful MLS system here and we've got great comps all the time. And she goes, we had to go to Zillow and Redfin and these other websites that have stuff there that they, and their own inventory if they're big enough, and friends and people that they find out information from, and they have to do that old school. So that's there. And that's the way you can do it. As far as being able to find tenants, you can advertise any way you want to. There are advertising services that landlords can use that are not part of the MLS system. Now, if you put it in the Houston MLS, it gets sent out to a whole bunch of different websites. But a lot of those websites are open to the public. So a landlord can go out and put up their own ads. Rentals.com, apartments.com, Zillow, an individual owner can put something in Zillow if they want to. So there are other avenues. Craigslist isn't as popular here as it is in other states, but it is one of the places you can do. Be very, very careful about showing your prospect a property that you find on Craigslist, because the scams there are rampant, really, really high level, and they look really official until you find out they're not. And one of the problems that we have in MLS is that MLS does not allow us to watermark a picture because it's open to the public and open to other agents. So you can't put a watermark on it. So the websites that go from MLS that they put on there, none of those pictures have watermarks on them, so people can steal them. But those of us in the business, when we put stuff on other websites, we watermark our pictures. It says my company name and a phone number on there. So if somebody wants you to call somebody else, that's kind of a clue that that's not the right person to be calling. So it's something that's coming up. So be careful with that. But yeah, very make sure you pre-screen and make sure you look at what the person wants to do and make sure that they're going to be qualified. Don't be running around. We're not talking a sale. You're not talking a ton of money. Average rental in Houston is $1,700. And so your typical, you can figure out what your typical percentage is going to be from there and what your split is with your broker, but you're not making a ton of money on one individual lease. It is not worth it to show somebody 30 houses and then find out they're in the middle of a big problem and that they can't move. It's not worth your time and your effort to go do that. So be careful of that. Someone put in here, listing agent can't send credit report, but can give the credit score to the landlord, right? Wrong. That's credit information. That is private credit information. That's your problem. When you do these, you have to get the tenant to do it themselves. Or a property manager. And if you're working with a property management company, we do all that in-house. And we follow the same rule. I have, in 30 years of running a property management company, I have never, ever, not one time sent a credit report to one of my clients. That is for our use in-house. And we can call the owner and give them a scenario. So yeah, they've got good credit. They've got so many people, they got so many pets, they got, whatever. They've got a good job, verifiable income, but we never send them the credit report. That is really something you just, please don't do that. That'll get you in trouble down the road. And don't give them the credit score. That's a problem. Mainly because credit scores have issues. Not every credit score reads the same. There is a lot of people that are, in some cases, moving away from some of the credit scores and the FICO scores. There are also they've made some changes to the FICO scores lately and how they calculate it, so it's getting better, but it has had problems in the past. If you use one of these screening companies like My Smart Move or some of the others that do these background checks on the tenants, in a lot of cases, they don't give the owner the credit score either. They give them a resident score or a tenant score. And it's a 1 to 5, and it's a red, yellow, green. And would this make a good tenant? Would this not make a good tenant? based on their background history. And so you can use those types of reports to do it. And the tenant can run it themselves if they want to go into one of these companies and set it up and run it for themselves and pay for it. And then any landlord can download it. And again, you're out of the middle, which is where you want to be. So look at the screening. That's a big deal. Figure out the best way to handle the screening and what they're going to look for and what the landlord wants. If you have, we're going to go over the application here in a minute, and I want to show you some of the triggers that a landlord is going to look for and the types of answers that you're going to have from your tenant before they ever get there. Section 8. Section 8 is a whole different animal. The voucher programs, all of these. I think the biggest problem we have is that no two are alike. If you are in the city of Houston, you're working with one voucher program. If you're in Montgomery County, you may be working with a different one. I know some cities in the US that have as many as 15 or 16 in the same city, and all the rules are different. So I'm not saying it's a bad system. They need to be consistent is the biggest problem. I'm not saying don't do it. There are a lot of people that love it, and that's fine. Just remember that the HUD typically pays the rent directly to the landlord for their portion of it. They don't pay them to the property manager, and they put the money in the owner's bank once it's approved. But the tenant has to go through a process to receive the voucher for one. And they have to do that. You can't really help them through that process. That's something that they have to do. And then the second part is that the property must be approved for HUD. So you have to wait until an inspection is done before you can actually move a tenant in and start collecting the money. And that process takes time. I don't know, I haven't seen during COVID, I haven't talked to anybody that went through that process right now. If anybody has gone through it this year after COVID started, please put something in the chat. I'd love to know what the times are. But even before, it could take a couple of weeks, and you might find a landlord reluctant to hold a house open for a couple of weeks on a maybe. And sometimes HUD pays more than market rent. They have a set price they'll pay depending on the parts of town and the sections that it's in. And sometimes that's higher than the market, and sometimes it's not. So it just depends. The money's steady if it works, but you have to work the system. The landlord has to apply, and the landlord has to be ready, and they have to be involved in it. I don't know a bunch of management companies that do very much of it. I'm sure there's some out there, but most of the people that I deal with do not participate because it's a process, and it's a little difficult for the landlord. Sometimes an individual landlord can have better success than a property manager can. And yeah. Okay, somebody said, I've talked to listing agents where I shared that their rent amount exceeded what the max rent amount allowed for the zip code, and they told me to add the difference to the security deposit. No, HUD has started to come down on that. There used to be people that if the rent amount on the HUD documents were one rate, they would write the lease at a higher rate and try to get the tenant to pay it either in security deposit or extra rent or anything like that. If that happens, they will, and HUD catches it, they will terminate that lease and they will throw the tenant off of the program. So the landlords have to be aware that is the max amount you can have on that property. And it doesn't matter what the split is. If it's say it's a $1,200 rent and HUD's going to pay $1,000 and the tenant's going to pay $200, you cannot write a $1,400 rent lease. You have to write it at the max of $1,200. Otherwise, if HUD catches you, that's going to be a problem. So be careful of that one. Okay, if anybody wants any other questions about HUD or anything like that, throw them in the chat, and I'll see if I can get you the answer for that one. What I want to do now is I want to share my screen, and let's see here. I want to show you something. Okay, I think you can all see my screen now. This is the Texas Realtors website. This is the website that all of you can go to. You're all members, and all your listings and everything are there. When you first go up, when you first go up there, this is the home screen, and the buyers, sellers, renters have stuff here. And then for the realtor members, you're in the red section, and I'm already logged in. There is a great page for resources here on COVID-19, and that's all kinds of different documents in there. There are some documents here about showings and things if you want to go through that area there. I want to show you over here, legal and ethics. These are all the forms that TAR produces. Remember that TAR and Texas Realtors is different from TREC. TREC produces promulgated forms that are used by sales agents to buy and sell real estate. TREC does not produce any leasing forms. All of their forms are required for use, and it's called promulgated, which means the legislature gave non-legal people, i.e. licensed real estate agents, the ability to complete the blanks in a form. Can't change it. Your principal has to change it, but you can fill it out and produce it. What Texas Realtors does is they have a ton of forms that are for your voluntary use. These are forms made by a broker lawyer committee that's part of Texas Realtors, and I've been on that committee since 2005, and we write all these forms for you guys for your use, and our job is to protect the agent and write good forms that you can use. They're all court tested, and almost all of them have been court tested. They're all they change every 2 years, typically when after the legislature meets. So the legislature will meet for the first 6 months of 2021, and then we'll probably have a meeting in late summer and see what we need to change if the legislature does anything that would change any of our forms. And there are tons of forms in here. So when you go in here, this is the exclusive right to lease, which is the document that the listing agent's going to use, or a management agreement. Both of them will give the listing agent the same rights, and a management agreement a little more rights, but that's in there. Those of you that are going to do buyer rep or tenant rep, this is the residential buyer tenant representation agreement. This is the typical agreement you use. It's the same agreement whether you are representing a tenant or you are representing a buyer. There is, over the years, we've decided that it's better to keep one form because you never know when a buyer may turn into a tenant or a tenant may turn into a buyer. And so they've just always kept the same one. I'm going to suggest that you use this and that you put money in here that you want to earn some type of money. Don't automatically just say, I don't, whatever you want to pay me is fine. I want to get money. You want to get somebody to pay you. And this is the hard part, market area and how long are you going to do this? Well, some people say it's hard to get it. A lot of the agents that I talk to on this said they don't do this, and I keep telling them they need to. If you run into a listing that says that they will only pay buyers agents or tenants agents, they will not pay sub agents. The rule in Texas is that if you don't have a buyer rep agreement, technically you work for the landlord, even though you're showing the tenant the property. So I highly advise you to get a tenant rep agreement, because if you run against a property manager or a landlord, then the listing agent says we only pay buyer reps, we don't pay sub agents. You might not get paid for that lease, and so you need to make sure that you're going to get some money that way. So make sure you get paid. Always tell people, please get paid. Don't do this for free. The other form, next form I want to show you is down in the leasing forms. The leasing forms are 2,000. They all start with a 2000. These are all the leasing forms: lease, agreement between brokers, application, pet agreement, extension, all of these types of things. There's a couple of new forms that are good, that are more on the property manager side, and it is more, okay, where is it? Here it is, down here. It is, where'd it go? This is one that you need to be aware of, but this is the big one. This is the new one, came out a couple of years ago. This is about assistance animals. If you have a tenant that has an assistance animals, there are rules. There is also a ton of fraud. So make sure that if your tenant wants to do an assistance animal, that they have the proper documentation. Going on the internet and paying $50 for a form is illegal. None of them are legal anymore. And HUD even finally, it took us 6 years, but even HUD finally agreed those are no longer legal. This needs to be something from a medical provider that has met this tenant. And so a lot of people use it because a lot of landlords restrict pets, and they've got a pit bull and the landlord says no pit bulls. And so they go out and they say, well, I'm going to try to get them in under an assistance animal. Be careful of that. Don't get involved in the middle of that if you're representing the tenant. And then the response to request for assistance animal is another form that you're going to see a lot of landlords starting to use down the road. But I want to spend a little time. We've got about 15 minutes, and I want to spend time on getting you guys familiar with what the landlord is looking for. This is the application that Texas Realtors puts out. And somebody asked, how long would you recommend a buyer tenant rep? That's up to you. I've seen people do it for 1 day or 2 hours. I'm going to go show you this one house, sign it. We're good for 2 hours. If you rent this house, then I get paid. If you don't, then go on about your other way. I see people that say the entire state of Texas for a year. And I think that's a little heavy-handed. There have been lawsuits about that, and the listing agent has lost, and the buyer and the agent lost. So I don't recommend something that wide open. I would think something is a little better on a shorter time frame. A lot of management companies and some landlords are now going to online applications, so they won't be using this form, but they'll be using something similar. So basically, the first part of this is a offer. Where do you want to live? When do you want to move in? How much rent do you want to pay? How much security deposit do you want to pay? And how long would you like to live there? It's an offer. And then here's the repairs. What repairs? I really strongly recommend you to see the house. One of the biggest problems that we have, and I hate to pick on the guys, but a guy will get transferred to Houston, and he'll come down there and spend 2 or 3 days with his new company or his transferred company, whatever it is. And he'll go out and they say, well, we got to find you a house. And he'll go out and he'll look at houses. And guys, we will find the closest house to that work that has all 4 walls standing. And I can see Marilyn laughing already, and I bet half of you, the rest of you are laughing. and then the wife comes in later, and he's already signed the lease, and she goes, oh, hell no, I'm not living in this house. And that creates a problem. So please make sure your prospects, that the couple or whoever you're moving in, make sure that they see this house first. It is probably one of the biggest issues that we have when people have not seen the property before they rent it. It's sales takes a little longer. It's easier to get out of. But the minute you get an application approved and you sign the lease, you're locked into that lease. And this process typically takes 2 or 3 days. It's not like a month or 2 when you're doing a sale. And so please make sure you know what you're doing before you get into any trouble like that. So put down what you want. Don't put the words make ready. That doesn't mean anything to anybody. Just say, we need the walls touched up, we need the carpet cleaned, we need a maid service, whatever you need done. If it doesn't look like you want to, please put your please make sure they put your name in here. And if you hand them this form, put your name in here before you hand it to them. I can't tell you how many apps that we get, there's nothing in here. And then later they find out, what do you mean they didn't put my name in there? They won't. The tenants won't. They just won't. So you put it in there for them. You're going to need to know all of their information. Socials, driver's license, birth date. This is important for credit and criminal background. So you need to have that. Credit works on social, criminal works on date of birth. Make sure you have their full name, all middle, everything. You're going to need that. Otherwise, if your name is Jim Smith, you're going to pull up all kinds of criminal records on Jim Smith. If you're James Bartholomew Smith, put that down there. It's a better search. How many people are going to live there? Current landlord and previous landlord. From a property manager's perspective or a screener's perspective, we want to me, the previous is more important because they moved out. We know how much deposit they got back. We know how they took care of the property. The landlord's been there. If it's the current rental, the landlord may have never been in the house. The landlord may have no idea what's going on in there. And the landlord may be in the middle of an eviction. And so the landlord's going, oh, they're perfect. Please take them. So make sure that they have this contact information in for both of those. Same for employment. We are looking for stability, which right now is a horrible year for that, but that's what we're looking for. If they're self-employed, get tax returns. The story, oh, my tax returns are in the box in the U-Haul. That's not going to cut it because we all know that that's probably not true. So please make sure they get their tax returns, make sure they do that kind of stuff. So then somebody asked a question, say, what about the top line lease application concerning, this is the property. Be the address of the client. Yeah, that's going to be you can do that. You can do an offer letter. I've seen people do an offer letter. This is concerned the second and third page, this line up here, this is concerning the property. Put the property address here. Okay. At this point, you may not know the landlord's name. So put the address up here. Current employers, previous employers, how many vehicles, this is where you put other income. And so gather that, have this discussion with your tenant before they sit down to start filling this out. What kind of pets do you have, if any? We have what we call the yes, no's. These are typical on a lot of applications, different types of applications, where they will go in and ask these questions. Okay, who has a waterbed? Anybody willing to admit they've got one? It's always the top question in here, and it's been here for decades. And I don't even know anybody that has one anymore. But do you smoke? Will you maintain renter's insurance? That's becoming more and more popular. There are a lot of landlords and a lot of property managers that are requiring the tenant to carry renter's insurance, and they're requiring them to name the landlord as an additional insured for the liability portion of it. And I will tell you, for a tenant rep, the renter's insurance is not for their stuff. It is, but a lot of people go, I don't have that much. I don't really care about getting insurance for it. That's not the purpose of renter's insurance. The big purpose of renter's insurance is liability. If your tenant leaves grease on the stove and burns down the kitchen, the way insurance works in Texas is that the landlord's insurance will pay to replace the kitchen. But the minute that happens, the landlord is going to want the tenant to pay the deductible, which they had to pay out of pocket for, and every penny the insurance company paid out, they're going to come back and subrogate against the tenant. In other words, means they're going to sue the tenant for that. That's what renter's insurance is for. I think the other one is the biggest problem that we had during Harvey was so many tenants were displaced. And so many tenant occupied homes got flooded in Harvey. A lot of owners did too, but if they had flood insurance, they were covered. If they didn't, FEMA or somebody might have helped them. Tenants lost out on everything. Renter's insurance does not cover flood unless it is added as a rider to it. And I have talked to insurance agents and I say, do you sell renter's insurance? And they say, yeah, we sell tons of them. How many of them have flood? And they say, none. The tenants never put flood on their renter's insurance. And in Texas, that's on you. It is not on the landlord. You cannot sue the landlord for the stuff that you lost in the flood, or the fact that you had to move, or the fact that the lease ended. All of those circumstances are just on the tenant if they don't have flood insurance. So please recommend to your people to get flood insurance. And I'm recommending to people to get flood insurance anywhere in Harris County. I mean, most of the people that flooded in Harris County and Harvey were not even on the floodplain. So if somebody says, do I have a danger of flooding anywhere in this city? I would say yes, because you do. So it would, and it's cheap if you're not in the flood zone. Are you in the military? Different rules for military people. Have you ever been evicted, been asked to move out, breached a lease? These questions scare some people. Don't be so scared. You need to fess up because we'll find out. But it doesn't mean we won't rent to you. I've had people that have been evicted before that we rent to. My first question is, what did you do about it? Did you just get evicted and you just said, to heck with it, I'm not going to pay them back? And then all of a sudden I find out you've been evicted 3 times and you never paid any of the landlords back or ever contacted the landlord. I'm not going to be number 4. But if something happened, somebody died, somebody got transferred, somebody got sick, somebody lost a job. I mean, life happens. In COVID, all kinds of stuff happens. But if you had a problem, then did you do anything about it when you got back on your feet? That's really what we want to know. Have you been asked to move out by the landlord? Hey, they want to sell it. Your lease is up. They don't want to extend it again. They ask you to move because they're going to sell the house. And that happens a lot. It happened a lot this year. We had clients that we rented their houses out because they got transferred out of the city and their job changed. They got pulled back from some overseas assignment early because of COVID. And when the lease was up, they asked the tenant to move because they had to move back into that house. That was their original home and they didn't have an option. So that happened. You will find that things like that happen. Have you ever filed for bankruptcy? I have arguments with some other property managers because I tell them my favorite tenant just completed Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And they're going, oh my God, why would you do that? And I go, well, their debt to income ratio is 0. They don't have any debt. If they have a good job and if they had decent rental history, they're my tenant for years because they can't buy a house. So they want to build their credit back. They want to get stable again. And so they'll stay. Landlords are looking for people that are going to stay. You don't want to turn over every year. If I've got to pay commissions and turnover costs and make ready costs and lost rent and all of that stuff if I turn over every year. I want a tenant that's going to stay for a decade. So if I can get a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, if they're in the middle of a bankruptcy, whether it's 7 or 13, doesn't matter. We can't take you because you can add that bankruptcy into it. So if you're in the middle of a bankruptcy, do not move until that is over because it's going to be very, very hard for you to find a place to move to if the landlord is going to ask you any questions at all. Going to a professional manager is not a good idea because we're going to ask those types of questions. Is listed if there is a previous flood list from Harvey. Not that I've seen. MLS for a very short time listed if the property was flooded that they did right after Harvey. They took that out. There was all kinds of legal issues with that, so they didn't do it. There were some bills passed last legislative session. There are already been some bills passed for this upcoming legislative session for Texas that want to have a type of a seller's disclosure for rentals, but it would just be whether or not the property is flooded before and something on that magnitude. There were 3 or 4 bills filed last session. None of them made it. It was real controversial, a lot of discussion on both sides. I am not a huge fan, although I see the need for it in certain circumstances. When I'm teaching a class for listing agents, I tell them, if you know that house flooded and the owner keeps trying to tell you it didn't, don't take the listing. Say that to selling agents too, or listing agents for sales. I say, you know, that subdivision went under. Why are you letting them fill out that seller disclosure? And they say it didn't flip. I wouldn't take the listing. So be very, very careful of that. But if you can get that from, it would be a nice list to have, but at the same time, you're also blacklisting all of those homes, and that's not a good idea either. So some of those homes look much better now than they did when Harvey was around. So that's what you're looking for. Credit issues. If you've been convicted, landlords are supposed to just look at convictions now, and only serious convictions. One of the things, if you have a criminal record, you got arrested 25 years ago for smoking a doobie, we don't care. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the drug dealers. We're looking for the check kiters, which is interesting. That's one of the exceptions. You can hold it against check kiters forever. Serious felonies. But even if somebody committed a felony 20 years ago, why would you hold it against them now? They've done their time in jail. They're no longer on probation. They're no longer on parole. They have paid their debt to society, and they've lived a decent life. Why would you hold that against them for the next 40 years? And so the old days, if you had a criminal record, you were done. But that's not the case anymore. So be aware that happens, and you do not want to look at arrest. You only want to look at convictions. There was a property management software company that took a big fine from the DOJ. It was in the millions because they were still including arrest records on the criminal reports they were given to the property managers that used their services. And everybody kept saying, you can't do that anymore. And they ignored it. And the Department of Justice came down on them big time. So we don't look at that kind of stuff anymore. Oh, check. Okay. Somebody said, what's a check kiter? The check kiter, they write hot checks all the time. It's not a good idea if you rent property to somebody that's going to give you hot checks all the time. So you don't want to do that. So if the tenant hasn't paid rent for 2 months, can the landlord move in or sell it? Not until the tenant's gone. You can sell it with the tenant in there, but the lease survives the sale. So you're going to be selling a property that hasn't had rent paid in 2 months. And if that lease goes until sometime next summer, the new landlord's going to have to agree to buy it in that condition with that tenant in place, with that lease in place. So until you can rectify that situation, you're kind of, would be kind of tough. I've had owners try to sell in the middle of a lease. You can do it. Typically the tenants aren't happy with it. Even if it's going to even if they're great tenants and pay the rent and everything's fine, their tenants aren't real happy in the middle of a lease when they have to change a landlord. But it is the law that if you sell the property, the lease survives until the term of that lease, or minimum 90 days if you're on a month-to-month lease. So the tenant has the rights to stay. And then this is you're a sex offender. That's always a tough one. We have a terrible database in this country. It puts high school sweethearts on the same list that you have middle-aged pedophile people on. So it's tough. And then is there any additional information? Somebody put in here earlier, what about an offer letter? Same thing. I see those. I'm not a big fan. I think that leads to more fair housing problems than it helps. I certainly don't want pictures. You get pictures of the family, no matter what they look like, you're liable to present that to a landlord that doesn't like whatever is in that picture. And so I'm not a big fan of it. I know a lot of people do it. I know there was a time that a lot of people really did it on sales, and you might think it helps, and it might, but it also might hurt. So just be aware of that. We don't even want to meet the tenant other than checking an ID until we've run the application and everything, because we want to keep everything generic. We want to keep everything on paper. We want to know, does this tenant apply? We want no outside influence on what other stuff might come in that might influence somebody in making that decision. So most management companies, we don't want that type of stuff. Yes, they do. The tenants do need to disclose, well, DUIs and illegal possession of guns or child abuse, that's going to show up on their criminal report. When we pull their criminal, that stuff will be there. And yes, I would fess it up front. I had, I smoked a doobie 25 years ago and it's on my criminal report. And I would rather the tenant over disclose, just like when you're listing a house, how many classes do you go to about the seller's disclosure? And they are always telling everybody both on our side and all the sellers, over disclose. Over disclose is always better than under disclose. You should be doing the same thing here. When you're a landlord renting out your house, you need to tell the agent everything about it, because if you don't, the tenants and the next door neighbors will. So over disclose always, and then everybody signs and it goes on about that way. We've got 10 minutes left. Let's go through. I want to go through a couple of things on the lease. These are good questions you guys are answering, so that's good. If you have any questions, stick them in there right now, because we've got looks like we've got 10 minutes. So put them in real quick and we'll look at it. On the lease, this is the problem with the new lease. A lot of people are now using zip forms and DocuSign when they sign a lease. And here's the problem if you've never looked at it from your side. You send it out, the landlord or the listing agent sends it out to your tenant, and the tenant signs it and it comes back. And here's what the tenant sees. They open it up and they see this. And of course, it's all filled out. And then it says, are you ready to sign? And you click the button and it goes. And then it goes. And all they see is about 3 or 4 inches above the signature block and 2 or 3 inches below the signature block. How much is the lease? How much is the rent? When is the rent due? What are the late fees? None of that is on the screen. So it is imperative that your tenants read this lease and go over this lease with you or somebody before they sign it. There are obligations in here. The biggest problem that I hear from property managers and from tenant reps is having tenants understand the rent paragraph. You're going to move in the middle of the month. How much? Say it's $1,000 rent. Most landlords are going to want you to pay the $1,000 for the first month, even if you're moving in the middle of the month. And then you're going to pay the prorate next month. But it's still going to be due on the first of the month. So and there are landlords out there that will say, okay, if you're going to move in the middle of December, I'll let you pay $500 in the first month, and then you're going to pay $1,000 on January 1. If I was a listing agent, I would be talking that agent out of that, or talking that landlord out of that, because again, we are in Houston. We're paying commissions. If you collect $500 for $1,000 lease up front and the tenant never pays the next month rent, you still owe the commission to the other agent, and the landlord still owes the commission to you. And you don't have enough money to pay it. And the landlord doesn't either. So what's going to happen from that landlord? They're going to be furious at their listing agent for accepting it that way. So this is why, and tenants don't sometimes understand that. Yes. And I'll tell you why I want it this way. I want to know that you have that $1,000 and whatever I'm charging you for the security deposit in your bank and in your hands. I want you to have skin in the game. I want you to have that much money up front so that I know that you're good for it. If you only have to give me a little security deposit and a couple of $100 for the prorate, you may never pay rent again. And so be prepared that most landlords are going to ask for the full month up front and then the prorated later. And I see some of them ask for it all at once. We want it before we ever give you the keys. And some want it, you can pay the prorate later. So it's okay. It's different ways for different things. That's the big thing on the lease. The other thing is repairs. Late charges are always in there, but on repairs, the landlord has to give you a phone number. This is not a home warranty number. The landlord needs to give you a phone number to the landlord or the property manager for emergencies. Most management companies, we have a portal on our websites that the tenants can submit maintenance requests for, that those work beautifully. But in after hours, they need to have a phone number. If all of a sudden you got water, the top of the water heater blows off and you've got water going everywhere, you need to be able to get a hold of somebody. So that landlord needs to have a number here. Please do not put a home warranty in here. That is not the purpose of a home warranty. So, okay, that's really about the only time we have questions. We have for stuff like this. I want to look at the questions. Is it same for apartment leases too? What if the tenant leaves before the first month due? That depends on the landlord. Same here. If you put the deposit down and then you don't move in, most of the time the lease is valid. There's no real pending in a lease. You just haven't moved in yet. So in MLS, it's the typical habit here that when the tenant signs and the landlord signs and say you're going to move in on January 1 and you sign the lease today, tenant gives you the security deposit today, everybody signs the lease. Most agents, not all of them, but most of them will put it in pending. And then come January 1, when the tenant gets the keys, they'll put it in leased. Legally, your lease is valid today. You just haven't, the move-in date just hasn't happened. There's really no pending, but we use it as pending in MLS so that you can track it. You can track the days on the market, the days to close, those types of things. But legally, it's a binding lease. So typically, the landlord could sue the tenant for the money, the first month's rent, and any rent until they find another tenant, and a relet fee if they put a relet fee in the lease. And the landlord will win that. So if the tenant decides they don't want to move out after they've already paid the deposit and everybody's signed, that doesn't mean they can get out. I say let's make a deal and get some money out of it and everybody go their own way. Let's see, can a deductible be charged on repairs? We took the it's only Houston that asked this question. Nobody else in the state asked. We took the deductible out of the lease probably 10 years ago because wear and tear is the landlord's responsibility according to the property code. Tenant damage, there's a clause in here that says the tenant has to pay for damages. That any repair that's done that's due to something that the tenant does, conditions caused by the tenant has to pay for it. But there is no longer a blank in here for deductibles. And I will tell you, as a longtime property manager, and almost every property manager I know will agree with me, if you put a deductible in the lease, the tenant won't call for repairs and then they get worse. So my advice is do not have a repair deductible. I know they're out there, and if your landlord insists on it, then you're just going to have to live with it. But I'm not, and they cannot charge you a repair deductible for these items: heating and air conditioning, water heaters, water penetration, those types of things. That is illegal. It's a violation of the property code to charge for a deductible for those types of items unless the tenant damaged it. Okay. I worked with one tenant applicant whose credit report we couldn't find sufficient data. Her job showed her as a fraud analyst. That's cute. She sent me her credit report embedded in an email, but did not have her name. I questioned her and she said she had resent it. Then I asked why I didn't have her DOB. That's when she stopped replying, because my next question would be, why was her social not on it? Exactly. You're going to get those types of things. My wife is a lover of rag dolls. Our 14-year ragdoll kitten died a couple of months ago. She wanted another ragdoll. These things sell for $1,000 a piece. And I said, okay, it's better than a Ferrari. It's better than a Ferrari. Just accept it. And she had this guy in Oklahoma convinced that he was going to send her a ragdoll and was only going to cost her $600. And then he made the fatal mistake. Instead of giving me a PayPal account, he gave me a Venmo account. And I said, I said, now I got you. And I sent him a nice little email and said, you got to prove who you are. And we never heard from him again. So that happens all the time. So that's something that you need to be aware of. That one is going to be, when you have that kind of stuff and you don't have a date of birth and you don't have a social, there's something wrong. And that's going to be an iffy. Oh, those of you that represent foreign people coming into the country, If they came from Canada or Mexico, we all share the common credit. So for those folks, you can run the regular credit report and it's going to have the credit stuff on it from those two countries. Most of the rest of them are not. In that case, I would look at the company that they're coming in to work for, which is typically the case for these folks coming to Houston from some other country. They're moving here for a job. If you've got a job with Exxon or Shell, my guess is Shell or Exxon has done the background check on you and they know you're pretty good. And in that case, sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. Don't just turn them down because they don't have credit. They don't have a US credit. They could have, it could be something that they have locally, and go up, make sure the letter's good, call Exxon or Shell or whoever it is, and make sure that they've got that job. But we've done that a lot in the past. You can't just hold it against them just because they don't have a US credit score. And you need to do a little more background check and check with the company, and that will help. EIN numbers, perfect. That's what you're looking for the 10. You can put that number, if you've got a visa coming from another country, you can actually put that number, it's the same nine digits. You can put that number into a screening and it might show up with something. So we've seen that happen before where you've got it. As long as you've got that number, then that says you're here legally. You've got a visa. I would have a problem if you have a visa that says you can only be here till the end of January. I don't know that I'd like to sign a year lease with you for that, but other than that, you should be fine. Their question they're asking is if the recording will be available. Don't we up? Yeah, all of this is put on har.com, and I will let Marilyn tell you that right as we are signing off. Any other questions? You can. I have seen people run credit with an EIN. It will actually, in some cases, show something. Not always, doesn't always work, but sometimes you can see some type of history because the credit companies are starting to keep track of some of those things. But okay, if there's no other questions, it is 1:30. It is time for us to end, and I thank you guys very much and have a great holiday season, and pray that 2021 is a whole lot better than 2020. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mike, so much for your presentation today.